You need to move out of the guest house by noon. It's already booked for my daughter's influencer retreat. Karen barked through the intercom, her voice crackling with entitlement and cheap perfume. I was still in my bathrobe, coffee in hand, staring dumbfounded at the surveillance monitor showing a woman in a leopard print scarf, sunglasses at sunrise, flanked by two guys hauling what looked like a giant ring light and an inflatable swan. One of them was rolling a suitcase across my garden path, flattening a bed of lavender I had just replanted last week. At first, I thought it was a prank. Then I saw the HOA petition in her hand and realized Karen wasn't joking. She had actually tried to seize my guest house for a live stream. What she didn't know was that her daughter was about to walk into one of the most secure CIA safe houses in the western United States. And Karen? She had just triggered a federal silent alarm that doesn't just warn, it watches. When I bought this property 2 years ago, I knew what I was getting into. It wasn't just the spectacular view or the detached guest house nestled under a curtain of vines. It was the structure itself, reinforced walls, biometric locks, encrypted signal scramblers, and a foundation built with enough redundancies to survive a drone strike. Of course, none of that was in the Zillow listing. The guest house was codenamed Nest Echo, an off-grid CIA dead drop point that had been retired from active use until I was reactivated 6 months ago. Officially, I was a consultant now. Unofficially, the agency preferred to keep a few pieces on the board just in case things got messy. And today, things were about to get very, very messy. Karen had always been the talk of the neighborhood, a walking HR violation with designer handbags and a fondness for turning minor complaints into federal issues. Last month, she tried to have a neighbor fined for having grass that was too green, claiming it set unfair expectations for other homeowners. Her daughter, Luna, yes, that's her legal name now after she changed it during a viral video involving crystals and kombucha, had recently returned from Bali and announced her new mission to heal America's toxic energy through branded meditation retreats. Apparently, my guest house looked perfect on her Pinterest board. I opened the front door as Karen snapped her fingers at the moving guys like she was directing a Broadway production. "Ma'am, I don't know what you think this is, but you're trespassing," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She raised her chin and smiled like she was the one doing me a favor. "You're not using the guest house." She peeked through the windows. "It's just sitting there. Luna needs space to work. Do you know how important healing work is?" I glanced at the guy awkwardly holding a yoga mat with a neon, Namaste or Go Away sticker on it. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Let me be clear," I replied, stepping out and placing myself between her crew and the guest house path. "This is private property. That building is not available for rent, and unless you want federal agents showing up, I suggest you leave." Karen's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to know she heard the word federal. But Karen wasn't built to take no for an answer. She whipped out a folded document from her handbag and slapped it against my chest like a parking ticket. "This is a community use requisition. I submitted it to the HOA. Your guest house has been deemed eligible for shared neighborhood benefit since it has not been actively used for 30 consecutive days. She actually used finger quotes when she said shared benefit, like it was a punchline. I scanned the paper. It was a printout of HOA bylaws with a clause highlighted in pink marker and half the sentence cut off where she clearly cropped the screenshot. "Karen," I said slowly, "this isn't a legal document, and my guest house is in use. It's just not the kind you'd notice on Instagram." Her brow furrowed, but she waved to Luna, who descended from the car like she was stepping onto a red carpet, dressed in a silk robe and oversized sunglasses. She surveyed the property with her phone already recording. "This will work," she said, voice flat and bored. "It's giving vintage bunker chick." Karen beamed like she had just won the lottery. I watched the camera flash as Luna tagged the location with hashtag #GuestHouseTakeover, and just like that, the coordinates of a classified CIA structure were shared with 1.2 million followers. I took a deep breath, turned back toward the house, and tapped my watch twice. Inside the guest house, systems quietly awakened. The glass darkened, cell signal vanished within a 2-block radius, and a silent ping was sent to Langley. All they needed was confirmation the house had been compromised. Karen was still ranting about how her daughter's work was more important than some dusty government secrets when a red laser dot traced across her handbag, then disappeared. Her smile flickered again. That night, I reviewed the security footage over dinner. Karen had returned just after 11 p.m. with gloves, a flashlight, and a tool kit, whispering instructions to Luna like they were planning a heist. She climbed the back fence and tried to open the patio door using a spoon. What she didn't realize was that every surface of the guest house was embedded with counter-surveillance. She might as well have walked into a James Bond movie set. When she finally gave up, Luna took a selfie and added a crying emoji captioned, "We got kicked out by the patriarchy." The next morning, the guest house doorbell rang. Karen, with a plastered smile, held a tray of organic muffins. "Peace offering," she said. "We got off on the wrong foot. Let's be neighbors, not enemies. Maybe just a weekend in the guest house." She winked. "You won't even know we're there." I took the muffins, nodded politely, and shut the door behind me. The CIA response team had already landed outside town. They weren't here for muffins. They were here for Luna and the trail of geotagged footage that now had 3 foreign IP addresses flagged for interest. Karen had no idea that her quest for clout had triggered a full-blown domestic protocol breach. Tomorrow they'd try again. And next time, they'd find out exactly why you never, ever demand access to something labeled private and no integrity, property of U.S. government, in faded paint on a locked iron gate. Because in this neighborhood, privacy isn't a suggestion, it's policy. The following morning began like the calm before a storm. Birds chirped, the sun rose gently over the rooftops, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe the muffins Karen left were her last hurrah. But as I sipped my coffee and turned on the guest house surveillance feed, that illusion shattered. There she was again, Karen strutting across my lawn like it was a red carpet, this time in high heels and a wide-brimmed sun hat, holding a clipboard and barking orders at a film crew that had somehow multiplied overnight. Luna trailed behind her with a frappuccino in one hand and a tiny lapdog in a designer purse slung over her shoulder, pausing every few feet to find her light. 3 men were unloading more gear from a rented van, including a full lighting rig, tripods, a makeup mirror with bulbs, and what I could only describe as a collapsible throne. By the time I reached the porch, Karen was already setting up what looked like a snack table on my side of the fence. "Karen," I said, voice low but firm. What part of "you're not allowed here" was unclear. She gave me that tight smile again, the one that said she was pretending to be polite but ready to go nuclear. "Oh, relax," she said breezily, waving her clipboard. "It's just a small content shoot. Luna is filming a healing ritual for her detox partnership. We're calling it The Rise of Radiance. Very exclusive, very tasteful. Don't worry, we'll clean up." Luna looked up from her phone and added, "And tag you. You'll get exposure." The irony of being offered exposure inside a top-secret CIA safe house made me nearly choke on my coffee. I glanced at the gate and realized it was propped open with one of my own flower pots, now cracked from being wedged under the latch. A heavy ring light buzzed to life behind me. Luna took her spot on the guest house steps, posed dramatically, and began to chant something about reclaiming her energy, while a wind machine. Yes, they brought a wind machine, Luger hair in slow motion. Meanwhile, Karen moved like a cruise director at full throttle, passing out branded incense sticks and directing the cameraman with flair. I stared at the scene, jaw slightly open, when my encrypted phone buzzed with a text that simply read, "Signal detected. Unregistered network. Possible breach." I knew then that this wasn't just a comedy of errors anymore. This was officially a threat vector. Karen marched over to me, clipboard in hand, and tapped it with her pen. "Listen, we're just going to use the guest house exterior. We won't go inside. It's a vibe. Your house has such Cold War energy. Very brutalist chick." I took the clipboard and scanned it. She'd written up a fake production agreement and forged my signature, badly. It looked like it had been traced from a driver's license. "This is fraud," I said flatly. "You are now one drone away from being in federal custody." She laughed as if I had told a dad joke. "Oh please, you and your imaginary threats. It's just a shed with an attitude." At that moment, Luna let out a blood-curdling shriek. One of the hidden scramblers had activated, sending a frequency that interfered with their microphones, and her earpiece zapped her just as she began a guided meditation. She threw the headset on the ground and stomped on it, howling, "This place has negative vibrations. My chakras are literally under attack." Karen rushed to her daughter like she'd been shot, fanning her with a packet of essential oils. "You brute," she hissed at me. "You've compromised her aura." I took a step forward and calmly said, "Leave now before this becomes a federal incident." But Luna, still riding a wave of influencer rage, stomped toward the guest house and tried the door. As expected, it didn't budge. Her thumb jabbed the keypad. No response. Then she yanked a camera stand and swung it at the doorknob in full view of the surveillance drone now hovering overhead. The keypad immediately shut down. Inside systems triggered. What they didn't know was the guest house's security wasn't just about entry. It also tracked proximity threats. The sensors had already marked Luna as a level 2 anomaly. Karen, now completely ignoring me, yelled, "Try the window," and waved the crew to flank the sides. One of the men reached for a stick to wedge under the frame. He didn't get far. A high-pitched screech sounded from within the building as the security pulse activated, a subtle but effective ultrasonic deterrent. Everyone froze. The sound only they could hear made them all clutch their heads and stagger back. Luna screamed again, shouting, "This house is haunted by tech demons." The crew, rattled and pale, began hurriedly packing up. Karen was still protesting, chasing them with the clipboard and shouting things like, "You'll never work in wellness again." As they scurried back to the van, I walked over to Luna, who was still huddled on the ground cradling her phone and muttering about hexes. I knelt beside her and said, "Let me guess. You tagged the location." She nodded slowly. "Geofilters boost engagement." I took her phone, checked the post, and sighed. It had already been lived for 15 minutes. My phone buzzed again. "Pain trace active. Incoming review team deployed. ETA 2 hours. Karen, unfazed, walked up and snatched the phone from me. "We'll be back tomorrow with a new crew. You can't gatekeep creativity. Your toxic masculine energy is literally killing our project." She grabbed her daughter's arm and marched her off, leaving a pile of tangled cables and abandoned incense in their wake. Back inside, I activated the manual override system. Lights flickered as the Safehouse went into full lockdown. Shutters closed, signal dampers engaged. The structure vanished off the grid in every digital sense. Luna's live stream was quietly buried under 1,000 fake reploads in unrelated locations, courtesy of the AI's disinformation team. I brewed another coffee and settled into my chair, watching the drone's live feed as Karen stood by the gate, shouting at her Uber driver because he refused to load the broken lights stand into the trunk. I knew what was coming. She'd escalate. She always did. But what Karen didn't understand was that she hadn't just annoyed a neighbor. She poked a system designed to watch without blinking, record without mercy, and act without hesitation. By trying to claim what didn't belong to her, she triggered the kind of attention no influencer campaign could survive. The CIA response team was already airborne. The game had started, and Karen didn't even know she was a pawn. Later that evening, I sat quietly in the main house, watching the drone footage on my secured tablet as the last flickers of pink sunset washed over the rooftop. The yard was calm now, silent and empty, but beneath the stillness, everything was primed. The guest house's biometric sensors were on full alert, electromagnetic shielding was humming quietly behind the walls, and every motion within 20 feet of the structure was being cataloged in real time. The agency had reviewed the live stream data Luna uploaded and flagged 2 foreign viewership spikes, Russia and Iran, both accessing the footage within the first 12 minutes. That was all it took. Nest Echo status was changed from dormant to semi-active. My role had just shifted from watchdog neighbor to field-level operative, all because Karen couldn't respect a locked gate. Around midnight, my infrared perimeter sensors flickered. Someone was back. I didn't even have to check the cameras to know who it was. Karen moved like a determined raccoon, loud, erratic, and surprisingly resourceful. Through the feed, I watched her approach the fence in all black athletic wear, her blonde hair tucked into a hoodie, latex gloves on her hands, and a pair of bolt cutters swinging from her wrist like a purse. Behind her, Luna tiptoed with exaggerated caution, wearing what looked like a sequined catsuit, as if the mission was part covered op, part fashion editorial. Karen whispered something and pointed toward the far end of the fence line, where the guest house had a side window partially shielded by ivy. That window, like everything else on that building, was fortified glass reinforced with a second layer of kinetic sensors and acoustic disruption field. Still, they crept toward it with the blind confidence of people who thought this was just a stubborn landlord situation. Karen placed a small stepladder under the window, and Luna began climbing it like she was on the final round of America's Next Top Influencer. When she reached the window, she tapped gently, then turned to the camera in her hand and whispered dramatically, "This is our breakthrough moment. They said we couldn't reclaim space. They were wrong." Manifesting entry in 3, 2, she yanked at the window frame. A soft pulse clicked beneath the glass. The ivy rustled unnaturally. A red light blinked silently behind the leaves. Luna yanked again, harder this time. Karen stood below her, whisper shouting encouragements like, "Pull with purpose," and "This is your truth moment." Then came the screech. The pulse activated fully. A sharp, inaudible frequency burst through the immediate airspace, specifically designed to disorient intruders and jam external electronics. Luna screamed and dropped her phone, which bounced off the stepladder and shattered on a rock. Karen, panicked, grabbed her daughter by the ankle to help her down, and both of them collapsed into a heap of limbs and glittery fabric at the base of the wall. As they scrambled to their feet, the floodlights blinked on, casting the yard in harsh white illumination. A mechanical voice echoed across the property, calm but chilling. "Unauthorized access detected. Zone secured. Law enforcement notification protocol initiated." Karen, frozen for a moment, looked up into the nearest camera lens and yelled, "You don't scare me. This is harassment. I'm calling the HOA and Channel 6. Then she grabbed Luna and started sprinting toward the gate, tripping over the flower pot they had used earlier and face-planting into my lawn. The camera zoomed in on the expression of pure, unfiltered indignation on her face as she hissed, "This isn't over." By the time she vanished into the street, I had already received confirmation that a satellite link-up had traced the attempted access to multiple geolocation pings, one in Latvia, another in Cairo, just milliseconds apart. What looked like an idiotic break-in had tripped a digital wire that lit up signals across 5 continents. Langley called. No voices, just a flash code. Level 3. They were on their way. The next morning was oddly quiet. Karen didn't show. Luna's socials had gone dark. Not even the HOA newsletter mentioned anything out of the ordinary, which in itself was suspicious. Around noon, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the cul-de-sac and parked directly across from the guest house. 3 men stepped out, dark suits, sunglasses, earpieces. The neighbors assumed they were high-end real estate agents. I knew better. The taller one walked straight up to my porch, gave a coded knock, and waited. I opened the door without a word and let him in. Inside, the briefing was short. The agency had intercepted chatter referencing Luna's live stream. She wasn't the target, but her platform had served as the perfect backdoor into a secure location's metadata. The footage itself wasn't harmful, but the location tag and auto captions gave away far more than she realized. Keywords like private, security, signal blackout, and encrypted locks were all red flags. Someone on the outside thought they had discovered a forgotten black site. They were preparing to act on it. The agent placed a folder on my table. Inside were stills from the live stream with digital overlays marking vulnerabilities. At the bottom was a single page labeled Civilians Involved, Monitor or Contain. Underneath were headshots of Karen and Luna. Karen's file had a sticky note, unintentional but aggressive. Luna's had a different note, Potential unwitting asset. Consider decoy op. I raised an eyebrow. The agent shrugged. She's chaotic, not malicious. Sometimes chaos is useful. The plan was to redirect attention, flood the net with false information, and quietly neutralize any active probes. Meanwhile, Karen and her daughter were to be given very specific instructions disguised as legal threats. A cease and desist would arrive by afternoon, followed by a visit from a federal mediator. If they pushed further, containment options would escalate. I watched from the porch as Karen's doorbell rang at exactly 2:00 p.m. She opened it in a house coat and curlers, still holding a Starbucks. The suited man handed her a packet thicker than a phone book and pointed to a specific page. Karen's face turned from annoyed to panicked as she scanned it. Her voice rose, audible even from across the street. "This is a joke, right? Is this some prank show? Who even are you people?" The agent said nothing. He simply nodded once and turned away. She called me 15 minutes later. Her voice was trembling, the first time I'd ever heard her rattled. "Look, I didn't know. I thought it was just a guest house. I didn't know it was, whatever this is. We're pulling back. No more live streams. We're taking a break." I responded calmly. "Good choice, Karen. That building isn't just bricks and locks. It's not for you. It's not for anyone. Just stay away from it." There was a pause, then a faint, shaky "okay," and the line went dead. 2 days passed with nothing but eerie quiet from Karen's house, an unnatural silence that made the entire neighborhood feel like it was holding its breath. No door slams. No complaints about weeds in adjacent yards. Not even her usual 4:00 p.m. lecture to the mailman about putting envelopes in upside down. Her silence was almost more unsettling than her chaos. I knew something was coming, and if there was one thing more dangerous than an outraged Karen, it was a Karen who thought she'd found a legal loophole. Sure enough, at precisely 10:07 a.m. on the third day, a large white truck rolled into the neighborhood with the words HOA Emergency Services plastered across the side. The logo was fake. The clipboards were real. And leading the convoy like a general with a grudge was Karen herself, dressed in what looked like a courtroom suit with shoulder pads, sharp enough to slice air. I watched the spectacle from my upstairs window as Karen began briefing 2 men and a woman with serious expressions and absolutely no idea what they were walking into. Within minutes, the so-called inspection team was strolling around my lawn, pointing at plants, tapping the fence, and taking photos of the guest house from every angle. One of them tried the front gate, and when it didn't open, he took out a screwdriver and looked around nervously. That was all I needed. I pressed a button on my phone, and the gate emitted a short electric buzz, non-lethal but persuasive. The man jumped back with a yelp. Karen shrieked, stormed toward the gate, and began yelling loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "This property is in violation of at least 5 HOA guidelines," she bellowed, waving a packet of printed papers. "Unauthorized construction, blocked community access," and she flipped a page dramatically. "Lack of architectural harmony with surrounding units." Behind her, Luna appeared again, this time dressed like she was filming a courtroom drama. She was live streaming herself, holding a Community Justice Nevu sign. Her audience had doubled since the last debacle. Apparently, being threatened by the government had made her something of a cult figure. I stepped outside calmly, coffee in hand, and faced the growing crowd now gathering near the sidewalk. Some neighbors were pretending to water their lawns. Others stood openly recording with their phones. Karen turned toward me with the glee of someone about to deliver a finishing move. "We've scheduled a full audit of your guest house per new Emergency Resolution 14C. We can demand access for inspection at any time. The vote passed last night. It's law." I raised an eyebrow. "A vote that included me?" She hesitated. "It was an executive session." I nodded slowly. "And the emergency services logo on your truck?" She looked smug. "Custom vinyl. Looks professional, doesn't it?" Just then, a black SUV turned onto the street, gliding past the crowd and pulling up smoothly behind my driveway. Karen faltered. The driver's door opened, and out stepped the same agent who delivered the federal cease and desist. This time, He was accompanied by 2 others. The crowd's murmurs hushed instantly. The lead agent walked right past Karen and handed me an envelope. Your temporary operational authority has been upgraded by order of Central Security Command. No entry may be authorized to the guest house for a minimum of 180 days. Any civilian attempting breach is subject to detainment and investigation. Karen blinked. What does that mean? She asked, voice cracking slightly. It means, I said, turning to her, that this is no longer just about my property. You've triggered a national security protocol. The agent turned to her and spoke in his usual clip tone. Ma'am, you and your daughter are now considered contact liabilities. This is not a criminal designation, but it does restrict your access to specific zones within a 4-mile radius. You'll be monitored. If you step over the boundary, you will be removed. Karen sputtered. You can't do that. I'm a homeowner. I have rights. I'll call the state attorney. I'll call the news. The agent nodded calmly. They've been briefed. You're already on a watch list. Have a nice day. With that, the 3 agents turned and left. The SUV drove off, leaving behind a stunned crowd and one woman who suddenly looked much, much smaller. Luna stopped her live stream mid-sentence. Her phone dangled in her hand. Are we famous again or in trouble? She whispered to Karen. Karen didn't respond. She stood perfectly still, shoulders tense, staring at the guest house as if it had grown fangs. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward her home, her fake emergency crew trailing behind her like confused interns after a failed startup pitch. That evening, I received an email from the HOA board. It was brief, unusually polite, and stated that all future property resolutions concerning my home would require unanimous board approval and legal review by municipal authorities. I laughed. The OA had finally learned who they were dealing with. But the best part came just after sunset, when a neighbor approached me discreetly as I watered my plants. Hey, he said sheepishly, so what's actually in the guest house? I smiled, shrugged, and replied, just some old furniture and a strong Wi-Fi signal. He nodded slowly, clearly not believing a word but too nervous to press further. Back inside, I checked the surveillance logs. Everything was quiet again, but I knew this wasn't over. Not because of Karen, she was effectively neutralized, but because the agency had now classified the property as active gray. That meant the Safehouse would be monitored not just by me, but by an entire network of satellites, drones, and embedded assets in the region. My quiet life had just become much less quiet. The last feed I checked before turning in showed Luna sitting on her front steps, phone in hand, staring blankly at the screen. She hadn't posted in hours. No hashtags. No stories. Just silence. A part of me almost felt bad. She was reckless, yes, but not evil. Karen had dragged her into something she didn't understand, and now she was caught between being a social media martyr and a national security problem. As I shut down the system and prepared for bed, I thought about how strange this world had become, how the line between public persona and private danger had all but vanished. Karen had wanted fame for her daughter, and she got it, just not the kind that ends in brand deals, more like sealed court records and encrypted files marked top secret, civilian interference. In the end, Karen's ego had become her own surveillance. She had screamed into the void of the internet until the void screamed back. And when it did, it wasn't with likes or follows. It was with protocols, agents, and silence. The kind of silence you earn when you cross the wrong line and stare into a doorway that should have stayed shut. The guest house light flickered off on its own, as it always did, at precisely 11:59 p.m. not by switch, by schedule, by command from somewhere far above. 1 week after the incident that left Karen practically mute and Luna in a digital identity crisis, things in the neighborhood took on a strange new calm. It wasn't peace, not exactly. It was more like a collective pause, as if everyone realized some invisible line had been crossed, and no one quite knew how to act now. Lawns were trimmed a little more neatly. Dogs were walked with quieter footsteps. Even the local kids stopped tossing their soccer balls near my fence, as if the mere shadow of the guest house had become radioactive. But despite the quiet, the story was far from over. The agency doesn't like unresolved threads. And as it turns out, neither did I. Karen had retreated almost completely from public view. Her once daily HOO complaint emails had stopped. The decorative flamingo army in her yard had vanished. She wasn't even at the last board meeting, and the minutes revealed that her position as HOA vice president had been temporarily suspended pending legal clarification. No one dared to ask what that meant. I'd seen the AI's file. She'd been classified as a soft-risk civilian, unintentionally dangerous, chronically uncooperative, and absolutely incapable of understanding the gravity of her actions. In other words, a walking liability in designer heels. But instead of throwing her in a cell, they'd done something more elegant. They boxed her in with silence. Legal silence. Financial silence. Digital silence. No one around her would say it, but everyone had received the same quietly distributed memo. Karen is no longer your problem. She's been handled. Luna, meanwhile, had rebranded overnight. Her new channel featured a complete shift in tone. Gone were the crystal bowl chants and pyramid energy diagrams. Now it was all about surviving governmental suppression and being targeted for spiritual enlightenment. The agency had decided not to remove her content. Instead, they redirected it. Her traffic was being funneled into monitored circles of misinformation, feeding the kind of chaos that made real intelligence slip beneath the surface. In essence, Luna had become her own containment unit, babbling into a self-made feedback loop of absurdity while the real threats passed unnoticed. Brilliant, disturbing, effective. But the final play hadn't yet unfolded, and I knew that because the Safehouse wasn't deactivated. If anything, the activity had increased. A new satellite link had gone live over the property. Drone patterns shifted from daily patrols to persistent hover coverage. And then, 2 days after the blackout order on Karen's property, I received a new file. It wasn't digital. It was hand-delivered in a weatherproof envelope slipped under my front door without a knock. Inside was a single page marked with an ultra-thin CIA seal and one line of text. Final asset reorientation scheduled. Prepare external interface. I knew what that meant. The agency was reproposing the entire scenario. Karen's public mess had drawn too much attention to a dormant safe house, so they were flipping the board. Instead of erasing what happened, they were going to fold it into the game. Use the exposure. Turn noise into misdirection. Classic tactic. But this time they wanted my help, not as a host, but as a trigger. The next morning, I invited the HOA board for coffee. Not a common gesture, but I needed their buy-in without them even knowing what they were agreeing to. We sat on my porch, sipped from matching mugs, and I gently guided the conversation toward renovations. I spoke of converting the guest house into a digital archive studio, dropping terms like heritage preservation and community engagement. The president nodded slowly, relieved to finally hear something normal from me. He agreed without hesitation. By dusk, they'd passed a vote approving my renovations unanimously. None of them noticed the encrypted Wi-Fi signal that reappeared under the name EchoHub_Observer_Node01. The agency sent a team that evening. They didn't wear suits this time, just jeans, tool belts, and baseball caps. To the neighbors, it looked like a film crew prepping for a documentary shoot. In reality, they were refitting the guest house with new tech, disguised antenna arrays, false walls lined with fiber optic mesh, a freshly seeded data vault beneath the floorboards, and cameras that didn't just watch. They listened, analyzed, and occasionally replied. The safe house wasn't just staying active. It was evolving into a forward-facing AI disinformation node. And it was using Karen's original interference as camouflage. She'd helped build the lie, so now it would be protected by it. The next phase was even more surreal. The agency asked me to host an open house, not a real one, a staged tour, filmed by their team, then leaked through a fake wellness group that tied back to Luna's now famous retreat saga. The video showed off the newly renovated energy sanctuary, complete with vague shots of meditation pillows and walls lined with obscure symbols. Viewers were encouraged to meditate on the truth of hidden knowledge, which essentially turned the entire facility into a digital myth. The video went viral in under 24 hours. Comments poured in. This looks like a healing fortress. They tried to stop her, but she won. The government scared of real peace. Exactly the reaction the agency wanted. With every ridiculous theory posted, the real operation became more invisible. The guest house had become a legend, and legends are rarely questioned. They're just repeated. Karen watched it unfold from her window, curtains half drawn. She hadn't left the house in days. I saw her once in the early morning, standing by her mailbox with a face full of confusion and defeat. For a woman who had built her life around control and appearances, the realization that neither mattered anymore was clearly eating her from the inside. No one listened to her now. Her calls went unanswered. Her influence had become a joke, a whisper at best. The neighborhood treated her like wallpaper, present but completely ignored. And then one final twist. The agency sent a letter addressed to Karen. Not a threat, not a warning. A job offer, disinformation liaison, remote testing division. Apparently, they'd been tracking her online interactions, her ability to twist facts, her talent for confident misinformation, and her complete lack of self-awareness made her a perfect candidate. Not for real fieldwork, of course, but as a live digital experiment in chaos theory. She could rant all she wanted. They would track, trace, and learn. Karen, unwittingly, was about to become the AI's favorite algorithm. They had weaponized her ego. I don't know if she'll accept, but even if she doesn't, it doesn't matter. The system had already adjusted. The guest house was invisible, the operation deeper than ever, and the one woman who had almost blown the lid off everything was now the least credible voice in town. I closed the surveillance app and stepped out onto my porch, breathing in the night air. The street lights flickered gently, crickets chirped, and the faint hum of encrypted data transmission pulsed from beneath the garden rocks. Peace had returned, not the quiet kind, the watched kind. And in this new calm, there was comfort, because now I knew every word, every threat, every stunt from Karen and her daughter had been rerouted, recycled, and absorbed into something far bigger than they could ever imagine. Their story didn't end. It got rewritten, and I was the editor.